No one in Britain believed the Spitfire could fail. By early 1940, Reginald Mitchell's sleek fighter had become a symbol of hope, fast, elegant, almost mythical. Pilots spoke about it with pride, newspapers called it Britain's guardian angel, and ground crews polished its wings like holy relics. But over the bloody skies of France, something terrifying was happening. Spitfires were falling out of the sky, with no enemy bullets and no warning. At first the reports came in whispers. A pilot chased a Messerschmitt 109, dived hard, and then simply lost control. The aircraft would twist, roll, and drop straight into the ground like a shattered bird. Flight Lieutenant Ginger Lacey watched his own wingman crash near Arras. 1 second the Spitfire was diving, the next it was spinning violently until it slammed into a wheat field. The pilot never escaped. By May 1940, the pattern was impossible to deny. Whenever Spitfire pilots pushed past 400 miles per hour in a steep dive, the fighter suddenly forced its nose downward and refused to respond. Pilots were pulling back with all their strength, bracing their feet against the cockpit, but the elevator simply stopped obeying. The Spitfire would continue its deadly plunge while the pilot sat helpless, watching the ground surge upward. The cause was aerodynamic, though poorly understood at the time. Airflow over the tailplane was breaking apart at extreme speeds, an early form of what engineers would later call compressibility. The air thickened, the center of pressure shifted forward, and the aircraft tucked under with brutal force. And it was killing pilots. Supermarine and the Royal Aircraft Establishment knew they were facing a crisis. The Spitfire Mark I and II were entering full service just as Britain was preparing for the Battle of Britain. If the aircraft couldn't safely dive on enemy bombers, the RAF's main fighter might prove to be a beautiful but deadly liability. Engineers suggested fixes, stronger elevators, new tail angles, maybe even a redesigned tail section. But these were guesses, and none guaranteed success. They needed real data, proof of how much stress a Spitfire could survive and whether a pilot could endure the forces involved in pulling out of a near-vertical, high-speed dive. The numbers were shocking. To understand the limits, someone would have to push a Spitfire to 12 times the force of gravity, a level of stress thought capable of ripping the wings off or killing the pilot. It was, in truth, a mission no one expected to survive. But test pilot Geoffrey Quill didn't look like someone preparing to die. At 30, he had the calm confidence of a man waiting for a train, not volunteering for a potentially fatal experiment. When the engineering team explained the inverted dive test, Quill simply nodded and said he would fly it himself. The engineers were stunned. They expected to hunt for a volunteer and spend days convincing him. Quill accepted the task as casually as if someone had asked him to fetch cigarettes. But Quill wasn't ordinary. Since 1936, he had flown everything the RAF allowed him to touch. Mitchell himself had trusted him to test the Spitfire's earliest designs. Quill knew the aircraft like a living creature, could sense its moods through the control stick, could read its warnings in the smallest vibration. That skill made him the safest choice, and also the most aware of the danger. High G maneuvers were normal in combat, usually around 4 or 5 G. But 12 G was another world. At that force, Quill's body would weigh nearly a ton. Blood would drain from his head so fast he risked blacking out. If the forces lasted more than a few seconds, he could suffer dangerous internal injuries. The Supermarine team begged him to reconsider. Maybe a younger pilot, one less essential to the Spitfire program, should take the risk. Quill refused, calmly, firmly, and politely. His reasoning was simple. He understood the Spitfire better than anyone else. If anything went wrong, any vibration, any strange response, he might be the only pilot alive who could recognize the danger and react in time. And he knew RAF pilots were already dying because of the dive problem. He felt responsible. He could not let someone else risk their life to uncover a flaw inside an aircraft he had certified. So the decision was made. Geoffrey Quill would fly the Spitfire into a 12G dive, gather the data, and somehow survive both the forces on his body and the punishment on the aircraft. Preparing the Spitfire for this brutal test meant pushing its structure far beyond anything Mitchell had imagined. The Mark I's stressed skin design was strong, but 12G would stretch every rivet and spar to the edge of failure. Chief designer Joseph Smith and his team approached the job like surgeons preparing a dangerous operation. The elliptical wings, normally a masterpiece of efficiency, would now have to carry loads equal to hanging a small truck from each wingtip. The engineers couldn't redesign the aircraft from scratch, so they strengthened what they could, inspected every joint, and reinforced key sections. They weren't just modifying a fighter. They were building a machine meant to walk the very edge of destruction. The work on the special test Spitfire continued from the moment engineers decided to push it to the edge of destruction. Every wing spar was X-rayed for hidden cracks. Extra bracing was added to the wing ribs, and new inspection panels were cut into the skin so ground crews could check critical joints after the flight. But the fuselage needed even more attention. If Quill survived the 12G pullout, the entire aircraft would try to bend around him, the bottom of the fuselage forced inward and the top stretched outward. To prevent the structure from folding, engineers reinforced the long internal beams with heavy riveted straps. The engine mounting frame, which would carry the enormous loads from the Merlin engine back into the airframe, received thicker plates and stronger rivets. The most debated modification, however, wasn't on the airframe at all, it was the test equipment. To measure the forces on Quill and on the aircraft, Supermarine installed a crude but clever mechanical accelerometer. Electronic sensors didn't exist in portable form in 1940, so engineers used a device with spring-loaded weights and tiny needles that scratched G-force readings onto smoked glass plates. If Quill didn't make it back, those fragile plates would be the only proof of what happened. The flight profile itself was designed with care, though care was a relative word for a mission that might end in mid-air breakup. Quill would climb to 28,000 feet, high enough to give him a chance to pull out, or at least ensure the end would be quick. At altitude, he would roll the Spitfire upside down and push forward into an inverted dive, a maneuver that created initial negative G before swinging into extreme positive G during recovery. To reach the target of 12G, he needed to exceed 500 miles per hour, faster than any Spitfire had ever been flown intentionally. Medical officers examined him again and again. They tested his heart, blood pressure, and vision. They couldn't simulate 12G, but they could at least confirm he was in perfect physical condition before attempting something that could permanently damage him. The doctors warned him bluntly, even if he lived, he might suffer lasting injuries. Quill listened politely and confirmed he would fly anyway. July 19, 1940 arrived crystal clear over Worthy Down Airfield in Hampshire. Quill chose this airfield on purpose, fewer homes below in case the test aircraft came apart in the sky. The modified Spitfire, K9834, looked ordinary at first glance. Only the extra inspection panels and the small bulge for the accelerometer hinted at its purpose. Quill arrived just after 7 a.m., carrying nothing unusual, no pressure suit, no special equipment. None of it would matter under 12G. He walked around the aircraft slowly, touching the wings, checking the undercarriage, moving each control surface by hand. Part of it was practical. Part of it was ritual. The familiar routine pushed down any thought of the risk ahead. The final briefing was short. Everyone knew the plan by heart. Climb. Roll inverted. Begin the dive. Build speed past 500 miles per hour. Roll upright near 10,000 feet. Pull out smoothly, enough to reach maximum G, but not so hard that the wings tore off. If he felt blackout coming, he was to stop immediately. If he sensed strange vibrations or structural failure, he was to level the wings and bail out. Everyone understood what that meant. At 500 miles per hour in a collapsing airframe, he would have only seconds, and that assumed he was still conscious. At 8:15, Quill climbed into the cockpit. Ground crew tightened the harness across his shoulders and waist, tight enough to hold him at 12G, loose enough that he could still breathe. The Merlin engine roared to life, steady and familiar. Quill checked his instruments, including the accelerometer sitting calmly at 1G. In half an hour, that needle might slam to 12. Or it might never return to 0. He eased the throttle forward and rolled onto the runway. No speeches. No drama. Just a test pilot going to work. The climb to 28,000 feet took 18 minutes. Quill focused on slow, steady breathing, the same rhythm pilots used in combat. At altitude, the land below looked like a quiet patchwork of fields, nothing like the war-torn terrain where Spitfires were already crashing in unexplained dives. He checked his position one last time, then rolled the aircraft inverted. The world flipped, sky below, earth above. Blood rushed to his head, pressure building behind his eyes. He pushed forward on the control column. The inverted dive steepened quickly, the Spitfire dropping toward the earth that appeared upside down above him. The airspeed climbed fast. 200 miles per hour. 250. 300. The aircraft accelerated hard, gravity and engine thrust combining into a vicious pull as the dive deepened. Quill held the wings perfectly level, resisting the instinct to roll upright. The dive still needed more speed. 400 miles per hour. The control column trembled as airflow turned rough and unstable. 450 miles per hour. The Spitfire began behaving far beyond its intended limits. Buffeting shook the whole airframe, blurring the instruments. The Merlin shrieked under the strain, its propeller tips close to breaking the sound barrier. -G pushed Quill upward in his harness, his helmet brushing the canopy as loose odds and ends drifted toward the roof. 500 miles per hour. That was the line. Recover now, or not at all. He snapped the Spitfire upright in a quick half-roll. Suddenly the ground was below again, rushing upward with terrifying speed. The altimeter spun downward. 12,000. 11,000. 10,000 feet. Nearly 3 miles lost in seconds. Now came the pullout, the moment that would either prove the airframe or destroy it. Quill hauled back on the stick with steady, determined pressure. For an instant, absolutely nothing changed. The Spitfire kept diving and a cold flicker of fear cut through him. This was exactly what had killed pilots over France. Then the aircraft finally bit into the air. The G-forces slammed into him like a solid mass. His body weight multiplied many times over, vision squeezing into a gray tunnel as blood was forced downward. His arms felt like they belonged to someone else, barely able to hold the stick. Breathing turned into a deliberate, painful effort as the straps crushed into his shoulders and hips. Around him, the aircraft groaned under the load. Metal creaked, rivets strained, and the wings flexed in a way that would have horrified any designer watching. But they held. Quill's consciousness thinned to a dim sliver. His grip on the controls remained only through instinct and training. Seconds stretched into something unrecognizable. He had no sense of time at all. And then, gradually, the crushing weight began to ease. 12G. 10G. At around 7G, his vision began returning in small patches. At 5G, thought returned in fragments. By 3G, the world finally made sense again. The Spitfire leveled out at roughly 4,800 feet, back to normal gravity. The sudden lightness felt impossible after the pounding he had endured. His first clear thought was simple disbelief. He was alive. His second was whether the aircraft had survived too. He tested the controls, ailerons, rudder, elevator. Everything responded. The wings were intact. The engine still hummed steadily, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. His hands shook uncontrollably, and faint dark spots hovered in his vision, burst blood vessels that would heal. A deep ache throbbed through his back and neck, the kind of compression injury that would trouble him for years, though he didn't yet know it. Quill turned the Spitfire gently toward Worthy Down, treating it with a careful respect owed to a machine that had just endured the unimaginable, alongside the man flying it. The engineers knew the Spitfire needed a full examination, every spar, every joint, every stressed surface checked and rechecked. But one essential question was already answered. The machine could survive a 12G pullout, and so could its pilot. Barely, but survival wasn't graded. You either lived or you didn't. As Worthy Down appeared ahead, Quill felt a quiet surge of relief. The data was captured on the accelerometer plates, cold, undeniable numbers that Supermarine desperately needed. Now the mysterious dive failures over France finally had real measurements behind them. Pilots would benefit from what he'd endured, even if they never knew who had made it possible. He brought the Spitfire back with extraordinary care, touching down so lightly it was almost ceremonial. The engine hadn't even stopped turning before engineers crowded the aircraft. Joseph Smith himself waited with notebook in hand, firing questions the moment Quill loosened his harness. Technicians handled the accelerometer like a priceless relic. Within minutes, the reading was confirmed, 11.8 G. Close enough to prove the point. The aircraft was stripped quickly. Panels came off, spars were inspected, joints checked for distortion. What they found was both reassuring and sobering. The main structure had stayed intact. No broken spars, no buckled fuselage, but some metal had clearly yielded under the load. The Spitfire would fly again, but it would never be quite the same aircraft. Still, the key fact remained: no catastrophic failure. Within days, senior RAF leadership had the report. The conclusion was unmistakable. The fatal tuck-under dives were not caused by a weak airframe but by high-speed aerodynamics, something that could be countered with updated procedures. Squadrons were briefed at once. Pilots learned to trim nose up during fast dives and, if necessary, roll inverted to ease their pullout. Almost immediately, dive-related accidents dropped across fighter command. Supermarine reacted just as quickly. Adjustments to the elevator mass balances were pushed into production by September, and retrofit kits spread through operational squadrons during the toughest weeks of the Battle of Britain. Dozens of pilots later credited the new guidance with saving their lives. The influence of that single test spread far beyond 1940. Later Spitfire models, and even post-war jets, were designed with the knowledge that aircraft had to survive loads far higher than normal use. Aviation medicine also advanced. Early anti-G techniques, pressure suit research, and new training methods all drew on data from tests like Quill's. Quill himself rarely spoke of the flight. In his memoir, he mentioned it only briefly, calling it interesting aerodynamically. To him, it had been another task to complete. Others celebrated combat victories. His achievements were quieter, preventing accidents rather than winning dogfights. But the effect was immense. Historians estimate that dozens of Spitfire pilots survived the Battle of Britain because of the revised dive recovery methods his test confirmed. Each of those pilots flew more missions, intercepted more bombers, and protected more civilians. Quill kept test flying into the 1950s, amassing more Spitfire hours than anyone in history. When he passed away in 1996, newspapers barely mentioned the dive test. Yet that short, brutal experiment likely saved more lives than any single combat mission of the war. His legacy wasn't dramatic headlines. It was the quiet, unseen prevention of tragedies that never happened. Exactly the kind of impact Quill always preferred.